The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipping through the mail slot like a viper through tall grass. Thessaly Ravenshade heard it hit the marble floor of her penthouse foyer, that distinctive whisper of expensive cardstock against stone. She didn't need to see the crimson wax seal to know who had sent it. The scent alone told her everything. Cedar and smoke, arrogance and authority. The smell of a man who had once been her entire world before he became the architect of her destruction. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, the cream-colored paper heavy with intention. 5 years. 5 years since she'd last touched anything bearing that scent, and her body still remembered. Her wolf still remembered. The part of her that was supposed to be dead and buried clawed at her ribs, whimpering like a beaten dog begging for scraps of affection from the master who had kicked it into the snow. Mom, you're crushing the mail. Thessaly blinked, the golden hue fading from her eyes as she looked down. Cassian stood at her waist, small fingers tugging on the silk of her blouse. At 4 years old, he was already the height of a 6-year-old human child, all dark hair and eyes that shifted between warm hazel and that predatory gold that marked him as something far more dangerous than his innocent face suggested. His twin brother Theron hovered behind him, clutching a toy spaceship in one hand and a juice box in the other, watching her with the same unsettling intensity. "Sorry, baby," Thessaly whispered, forcing her grip to loosen. The envelope had creased under the pressure of her fingers, leaving deep impressions in the velvet finish. Just junk mail. It smells like the forest. Evander's voice drifted from the kitchen doorway. He was the most sensitive of her 4 sons, the one whose powers manifested in ways that terrified even her sometimes. His violet eyes, so much like her own, were fixed on the envelope with an expression far too knowing for a child who should still believe in fairy tales. Like the place where bad things happen. Thessaly's heart clenched. She had tried so hard to shield them from her past, to build a world where they would never have to know the cold brutality of rejection, the soul-crushing weight of being deemed worthless by the one person whose opinion should have mattered most. But children, especially children like hers, saw through lies the way wolves saw through darkness. "It's from the past," she said softly, setting the envelope on the entry table. "Nothing that concerns you, but it does concern them." The 4th voice came from Lysander, who had appeared at the top of the spiral staircase with a book tucked under his arm. He was the quietest of the 4, the one who watched and calculated, who understood strategy in a way that made Thessaly simultaneously proud and terrified for what his future might hold. Because it has his scent. And his scent is our scent. The truth of it hung in the air between them. Her sons, these 4 miracles who shouldn't exist, carried the bloodline of the man who had thrown her away like garbage. They had his eyes when the wolf rose to the surface. They had his bone structure, his presence, the weight of alpha dominance that made grown wolves bow their heads when her babies walked past. Thessaly crossed to the kitchen island, her heels clicking against the hardwood, with a rhythm that helped ground her spiraling thoughts. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline gleamed under the pale morning light. She had built this life from nothing, crawled out of the snow half dead and pregnant, turned desperation into determination, and created an empire that made her untouchable. Ravenshade Alchemics was the leading supplier of holistic remedies for lycanthropes worldwide. She employed over 200 people across 3 continents. She had money, power, influence, Everything she'd been told she would never have without a mate, without a pack, without the blessing of an alpha king who had decided she was too broken to deserve his name. She slid the envelope open with a silver letter opener, the blade catching the light. The invitation inside was exactly as pretentious as she'd expected. Thick vellum, gold-embossed lettering, the kind of formal announcement that screamed, "Look at me. Look at what I have. Look at what you lost. By order of His Majesty, Alpha King Alaric Shadowthorn of the Obsidian Moonpack, you are hereby summoned to the Royal Solstice Ball. The King wishes to extend an olive branch to all former pack members. Furthermore, His Majesty will be officially announcing the conception of his heir with his future queen, Seraphine Goldveil. Your presence is requested to witness the prosperity of the crown." The words blurred as Thessaly read them a second time, then a third. Summoned, not invited. As if she were still subject to his authority, still bound by pack law that should have severed the moment he'd rejected her. And the conception of his heir. The dagger, wrapped in silk and delivered with a smile. He wanted her there to see that he had succeeded where she had allegedly failed. Wanted to parade his fertile new mate in front of the woman he'd called barren, useless, a dead branch on his family tree. Thessaly let out a laugh. It was a cold sound, sharp-edged and bitter. It echoed in the cavernous kitchen, making Cassian's ears flatten against his head in a gesture so wolf-like it would have been adorable if her heart weren't currently being crushed in a vice. "He wants to rub it in," she whispered to the empty air. "Wants to see me break. Who wants to see you break?" She turned. Silas stood in the doorway, her beta, her friend, the man who had found her half frozen in a ditch 5 years ago and hadn't asked a single question before carrying her to safety. He'd helped her build everything. Been uncle to her boys, COO of her company, the brother she'd never had by blood, but had earned through loyalty that ran deeper than any pack bond. Alaric, Thessaly said, shoving the invitation across the marble counter. He's inviting me to the Obsidian Moon to celebrate Seraphine's pregnancy. Silas picked up the card, his jaw tightening as he read. "The man's a sadist," he muttered. "He rejected you for being barren. Now he wants you to watch him celebrate his fertility. Throw it in the trash, Thessaly. You don't need this." "I should," she agreed. Her eyes drifted to the living room where her 4 sons had abandoned their questioning and returned to their games. Cassian and Theron were wrestling on the carpet, their play growls echoing through the space. Evander sat cross-legged by the window, building an elaborate tower from blocks that glowed faintly with each piece he added. Lysander had claimed the armchair, his book open, but his gaze fixed on her with that unnerving awareness that made her wonder if he could read her thoughts. Quadruplets. The pack healer, a woman named Isolde, had looked Thessaly in the eye 5 years ago and declared her womb cursed. Had told Alaric that she carried the mark of the empty vessel, that she would never bear children, that keeping her as his mate would doom the royal bloodline to extinction. It had been a lie, a poison, Thessaly had later discovered, administered in her tea over months to mask her scent and suppress her heat cycles. By the time she'd realized what Seraphine had done, she was already exiled, shivering in a motel room 3 states away, bent over a toilet, certain she was dying from hypothermia or grief or both, until the clinic had delivered news that shattered her understanding of reality. "You're pregnant, Miss Ravenshade. About 6 weeks along, and there are 4 distinct heartbeats. 4. Not one miracle, but four. Four alpha-blooded sons who had grown inside the supposedly cursed womb. Four living pieces of proof that everything Alaric had believed about her was wrong. I'm not throwing it away. Thessaly said softly, that dangerous smile touching her lips again. The one that made shareholders nervous and competitors flee. Silas, I built an empire from nothing. Survived what should have killed me. Raised four sons who set off car alarms when they walk down the street because their power bleeds through their skin. Thessaly, don't. Silas's voice carried a warning. You don't need him. You have the boys. You have the company. You have everything. He thinks I'm broken. Her eyes flashed violet, the sign of her dormant alpha female bloodline finally waking after years of suppression. He thinks I'm the same weak girl who begged at his feet while he spat on me. He wants to show off his heir to the woman he deemed unworthy of carrying one. She looked at her sons, at Cassian's laugh as he pinned his brother, at Theron's delighted shriek as he reversed the position, at Evander's tower that now pulsed with soft light, defying physics, at Lysander's steady gaze that held understanding beyond his years. I think it's time Alaric met his sons. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war, because that's what this was, wasn't it? Not a reconciliation, not a peace offering, a battle, one she intended to win. Pack the bags, Silas, Thessaly said, her voice steady now, all hesitation burned away by the fire of purpose. We're going to the Obsidian Moon. 5 years ago, on the coldest night of winter, Thessaly had crawled through snow until her fingers went numb and her lips turned blue. She remembered the bite of ice against her skin, the way her breath came in ragged gasps that felt like knives in her lungs. Most of all, she remembered Alaric's face as he'd looked down at her. Disgust and disappointment etched into every handsome line. You were supposed to be my queen, he'd said, each word a nail in her coffin. But you're nothing but a liability, a defective mate who can't even fulfill the most basic purpose. Leave, and don't come back. She'd crawled, actually crawled on hands and knees until she'd crossed the territory border, until the pack bonds had snapped like rotten rope, leaving her hollow and gasping. A rogue, packless, mateless, supposedly childless. The motel where she'd collapsed had been a rat-infested dive on the outskirts of Portland. $40 a night, stained carpet, a heater that coughed more than it warmed. Thessaly had paid cash for a week, locked herself in the bathroom, and vomited until there was nothing left but bile and despair. She'd thought it was the end. Hypothermia setting in, her body shutting down, the mercy of death coming to claim her before she had to face the humiliation of living as a rejected barren omega in a world that valued females only for their wombs. But her body had other ideas. The vomiting continued, her breasts grew tender, and when she'd finally dragged herself to a free clinic, desperate for something to stop the sickness, the nurse had given her a look of pity mixed with confusion. Honey, you're not dying. You're pregnant. Impossible, Thessaly had whispered. I can't. The healer said I couldn't. The nurse had shown her the ultrasound. 4 tiny flickers on the grainy screen. 4 heartbeats, impossibly strong, impossibly real. 4 lives growing inside a womb that had been declared dead and useless. Thessaly had sobbed, not from joy, not yet, from rage, from the soul-deep fury of realizing she'd been lied to, manipulated, destroyed based on fabricated evidence. Someone had poisoned her, Someone had made sure Alaric would reject her, and she had a very good idea who. Seraphine Goldveil. The beta female who had always watched Alaric with hungry eyes, who had brought Thessaly tea every morning with a smile that never reached her eyes, who had whispered poison in the king's ear about duty and legacy and the importance of a fertile mate. That night, as Thessaly lay in the motel bed with one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, she'd made a vow. She would survive. She would raise her sons. And when the time was right, when she was strong enough that no one could ever make her crawl again, she would return. Not to beg, to conquer. The private convoy that pulled up to Thessaly's building 6 days later wasn't a standard vehicle service. It was 3 armored SUVs, custom-made for high-value cargo, the kind Ravenshade alchemics used to transport rare ingredients worth more than most people's houses. Bulletproof glass, reinforced frames, drivers who were all ex-military and discreetly armed, overkill for a weekend trip. Necessary for transporting 4 alpha-blooded children into hostile territory. Thessaly watched from the penthouse balcony as her security team loaded luggage. Silas had tried one last time to talk her out of this, but she'd shut him down with a look. This wasn't about revenge, though that would be sweet. It was about her sons. They deserved to know where they came from, deserved to see their father, even if only to understand what kind of man could throw away his own blood. And perhaps, in the darkest corner of her heart, Thessaly needed Alaric to see what he'd lost, needed him to look at the 4 perfect, powerful sons he'd never know and understand that his greatest mistake wasn't rejecting a weak mate. It was failing to recognize a queen. "Boys, come here." She called into the penthouse. They appeared instantly, dressed in the tailored suits she'd had custom made. Navy for Cassian, black for Theron, charcoal for Evander, burgundy for Lysander. They looked like tiny businessmen, absurdly adorable, and yet somehow intimidating in the way only alpha children could be. "We're going on a trip," Thessaly said, kneeling so she was at their eye level. "To a place I used to live before you were born. There are going to be a lot of wolves there. Some of them might say things that are unkind. I need you to promise me you'll stay close and stay calm." "Why would they be unkind?" Cassian asked, his head tilting in that bird-like gesture of curiosity. "Because they don't understand what you are yet." Thessaly smoothed his dark hair, her heart aching at how much he looked like Alaric. "But they will. I promise you, by the time we leave, everyone will understand exactly what you are." "Princes," Lysander said quietly. "We're princes, aren't we? That's what the old wolf called us when we went to the park last week. He smelled us and went very still and called us princes." Thessaly's breath caught. She'd noticed the elderly alpha watching her sons with wide eyes, had intercepted before he could approach. "You are," she admitted. "Your father is a king, and that makes you royalty, whether he acknowledges it or not. Does he want to acknowledge it?" Evander's violet eyes were too knowing. "Or are we going to make him?" A slow smile curved Thessaly's lips. "We're going to give him the choice, and then watch what he does with it." The drive to Obsidian Moon territory took 6 hours through winding mountain roads. Thessaly sat in the lead vehicle with Silas driving and her sons in the back, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to dense forest. The air grew heavier as they approached, saturated with the pheromones of packlands, hundreds of wolves living in concentrated territory. Evander was the first to react. his small hand pressing against the window. "Mommy, my teeth hurt. It's the pressure, baby." Thessaly reached back to squeeze his knee. "Your wolf can feel all the others. It wants to respond, to show dominance. But you're wearing your charm, remember? It will help." She'd crafted the moonstone pendants herself, each one inscribed with dampening runes. They wouldn't completely hide her son's nature, but they would soften the edges, make their power less obvious to casual observation. When the time came to reveal what they truly were, she wanted it to be on her terms. As the convoy approached the main gates of the Obsidian Moon Estate, Thessaly's stomach twisted. The last time she'd seen these iron gates, she'd been on the other side of them, banished and broken. Now she rolled up in an armored caravan worth more than the annual GDP of a small country, wearing a designer dress that cost what most pack members made in a month. The press was already there. Cameras flashed as the convoy slowed. Reporters from the Shifter News Network swarmed the entrance, their telephoto lenses trained on the tinted windows. Alaric had turned this into a spectacle, just as she'd known he would. The rejected mate returning to witness her replacement's triumph. Perfect. Stay in the second vehicle until I give the signal. Thessaly instructed through the earpiece connected to Silas. I go in first. Let them get their pictures. Let them think I came alone. Thessaly, be careful. Silas's voice crackled with concern. This is still his territory, his rules. Not for long, she murmured, checking her reflection in the compact mirror. The woman who stared back was a stranger to the girl who had been exiled. Stronger, sharper, a predator in designer heels and diamonds. The door opened. Thessaly stepped out into the crisp mountain air and the explosion of camera flashes. She'd chosen her outfit with surgical precision. A gown of midnight blue silk that hugged every curve motherhood had enhanced, cut dangerously low in the back to expose the graceful line of her spine. Diamond drops hung from her ears, catching the light like captured stars. Her dark hair fell in chocolate waves over one shoulder, artfully messy in the way that cost a fortune to achieve. A hush fell over the red carpet. Somewhere in the crowd, she heard a whispered, "That's the rejected mate. She looks like royalty." Thessaly smiled, kept her head high, ascended the grand stairs to the main entrance as if she owned them, as if 5 years hadn't passed since she'd been dragged down these same steps in rags and shame. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered. Crystal chandeliers dripping light like frozen waterfalls, gold leaf on every pillar, marble floors so polished they reflected the glittering crowd like a mirror. And at the far end, elevated on a dais, 2 thrones. Alaric Shadowthorn sat on the larger one, and Thessaly's breath stopped despite every mental preparation she'd done. 5 years should have dulled the impact of seeing him, should have made him smaller, less significant, just another man who'd proven himself unworthy. But Alaric had never been just another man. He was 6'4" of coiled muscle and barely restrained dominance, his presence filling the room like thunder before a storm. His jaw was sharper than she remembered, carved from granite and determination. His eyes, those chips of flint that could cut or caress depending on his mood, swept the crowd with the lazy confidence of a man who knew he was apex. Next to him sat Seraphine. She glowed, one hand resting possessively on the small bump visible beneath her white gown. White, as if she had any right to that color, to the symbol of purity and innocence. Thessaly's wolf snarled in her chest, wanting blood, wanting to tear that lying throat out and paint the marble red. Not yet, she told herself. Control. Always control. The steward announced her, Miss Thessaly Ravenshade. The music stopped. Alaric's head snapped up so fast Thessaly heard vertebrae crack even from across the room. For one frozen moment, time stopped. His eyes locked onto hers, and she saw the cascade of emotions flicker across his face before he could slam the mask back into place. Shock. Recognition. Something that might have been desire, quickly buried under layers of kingly composure. He stood. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he descended the dais steps, each movement deliberate and predatory. The crowd parted like water before a shark, creating a wide circle around them. Thessaly's heart hammered against her ribs. The mate bond, that cursed thing she'd thought severed, flared to life like a banked fire suddenly fed oxygen. Her skin flushed. Her wolf whined, wanting to submit, to crawl to him and beg forgiveness for failing him. She crushed the instinct with iron will. She was not that girl anymore. Alaric stopped 2 feet away, close enough that his scent, cedar and smoke and dark promises, wrapped around her like invisible chains. He inhaled deeply, his brow furrowing in confusion. He'd expected the smell of misery and poverty. Instead, he smelled money, confidence, and something else he couldn't quite place. Something sweet and warm that made his pupils dilate. You came. His voice was a deep rumble that she felt in her bones. It tried to trigger the submission response, tried to make her knees weak and her resolve crumble. Thessaly smiled. You invited me, Your Majesty. It would have been rude to decline. Alaric's eyes traveled over her, cataloging every change, every difference from the shivering, broken woman he'd thrown into the snow. His jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering in those flint-gray depths. I see you found a way to clothe yourself. The words came out rougher than he intended, lacking the casual cruelty he'd aimed for. Though I wonder how a rogue affords Valentino. The designer's name dropped from his lips with the precision of a man who'd been briefed. Of course he had. Alaric Shadowthorn didn't do anything without intelligence, without preparation. He would have had his people tracking her the moment the RSVP arrived, would have discovered Ravenshade alchemics, her net worth, her reputation as a woman who destroyed competitors and built empires from ash. Thessaly tilted her head, letting her hair slide over one bare shoulder. Hard work, Your Majesty. Vision. The ability to recognize poison when it's served in a teacup. Her eyes flicked past him to Seraphine, who had risen from her throne and was gliding down the steps with the grace of a woman who believed she'd already won. Speaking of which, congratulations on the impending arrival. I'm sure Seraphine's child will be everything you hoped for. The barb hit its mark. Alaric's nostrils flared, his wolf rising close to the surface. The air around them thickened with dominance, his alpha aura pressing down on the room like a physical weight. Lesser wolves dropped their gazes. A few of the omegas near the buffet table actually whimpered. Thessaly stood her ground, let her violet eyes flash in challenge. She wasn't pack anymore, wasn't subject to his authority. And her wolf, that part of her that had been beaten into submission 5 years ago, had learned new tricks in the wilderness. Oh, Alaric, don't be cruel. Seraphine's voice cut through the tension like honey laced with arsenic. She linked her arm through his, pressing close in a display of possession that made Thessaly's fingers itch for violence. Poor Thessaly. It must be so difficult for her to see us like this, knowing she's empty inside, knowing she failed where I succeeded. Seraphine's free hand drifted to her stomach, the gesture calculated for maximum impact. The crowd murmured, some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction at watching the rejected mate humiliated. "Did you bring a gift for the baby?" Seraphine continued, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Or perhaps you're looking for a handout. I'm sure we could find you some position in the kitchens. You always did have a talent for brewing tea." The mention of tea made Thessaly's blood run cold, then boiling hot. Because Seraphine knew. The bitch knew exactly what she'd done, and she was gloating about it, secure in the belief that Thessaly had no proof, no recourse, nothing but her word against a future queen's. Thessaly returned the smile. It wasn't a nice expression. It was the smile of a wolf who just heard the trap spring shut, who knew the prey had walked exactly where she wanted them. "I didn't bring a gift." Her voice carried to the back of the silent ballroom, each word precisely enunciated. "And I certainly didn't come for a handout. I came to correct a narrative." Alaric frowned, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of the ceremonial dagger at his waist. An unconscious gesture of dominance, of warning. Narrative? The only narrative is that you were barren, Thessaly. Unfit to carry the royal line. My bloodline would have died with you. Your bloodline. Thessaly raised one elegant eyebrow. You speak so confidently about genetics, Alaric. About legacy and blood. But you seem to have forgotten the most basic principle of inheritance. What are you talking about? His patience was thinning, his wolf snarling just beneath the skin. She could see it in the way his muscles tensed, the slight elongation of his canines. Leave now, before I have the guards escort you out. You're a stain on this celebration. I'll leave. Thessaly took a deliberate step backward, her heels clicking on marble. But first, I think my children deserve to meet their father. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Alaric froze. Seraphine's face went sheet white. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible even over the string quartet that had been playing softly in the corner and now trailed off into discordant silence. "Your what?" Alaric's voice dropped to a sub-vocal growl that vibrated in Thessaly's chest cavity. "My children," she repeated, savoring each syllable. Thessaly raised one hand and snapped her fingers. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. The double doors at the entrance, which had been ceremonially closed after her arrival, exploded open. Not a gentle opening. They slammed back with such force that one of the ancient hinges cracked, the sound of splitting metal making several wolves jump. The doorman stumbled backward, shock written across his face. Silas walked in first, his expression carved from stone, eyes scanning for threats. But nobody was looking at him. Every gaze in the room had locked onto the four small figures who entered behind him in perfect V formation. 4 boys, dressed in tailored suits that probably cost more than most pack members earned in a year. They didn't toddle or skip or show any of the chaotic energy expected from 4-year-olds. They moved with synchronized precision, a prowling gait that was pure predator, pure alpha, pure undiluted dominance compressed into child-sized bodies. Cassian led in navy blue, his dark hair catching the chandelier light. Theron flanked him in black, a mirror image save for the small scar on his chin from roughhousing. Evander glided in charcoal gray, his violet eyes already scanning the room with unnatural awareness. Lysander brought up the rear in Burgundy, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on Alaric with an intensity that made grown wolves shift uncomfortably. The resemblance was catastrophic, undeniable. Alaric's black hair, Alaric's sharp nose and strong jaw in miniature, Alaric's bone structure, his presence, his aura concentrated and multiplied by 4. A woman near the champagne fountain gasped, "Oh my goddess, they're his, they're all his." The crowd erupted into chaos. Whispers became shouts. Phones appeared, recording everything despite the supposed ban on devices. This was history. This was scandal. This was the kind of drama that would be dissected in pack councils and gossip circles for generations. But none of that mattered because Alaric was staring at the 4 boys like he'd been struck by lightning. His face had gone pale beneath his tan, all the blood draining south as shock hit his system like a physical blow. His wolf was howling inside his chest. Thessaly could see it in the way his hands trembled, the way his pupils dilated and contracted rapidly as instinct warred with disbelief. The boys stopped 10 feet away from the dais. Cassian, the natural leader, stepped forward another 2 paces. He looked up at the massive man towering over him, at the king who was supposed to be invincible, untouchable, apex of all alphas. Cassian didn't flinch, didn't cower, didn't show even a flicker of the submission that any wolf child should display before an alpha king. Instead, his eyes flashed. Not the hazel brown of a normal child, not even the gold of a standard alpha. They ignited with a brilliant, blinding radiance, the precise shade that only appeared in the bloodline of ruling alphas, the color that marked someone born to command, to conquer, to wear a crown. The air pressure in the room changed. Several glasses on nearby tables cracked from the force of the aura radiating off one 4-year-old boy. Elder wolves who had served Alaric's grandfather took involuntary steps backward, their wolves recognizing something primal and terrifying. When Cassian spoke, his voice carried a resonance that shouldn't have been possible. It rumbled with harmonics, with the weight of alpha command compressed into vocal cords that should still sound cherubic and sweet. "You smell like a liar." The room detonated. Shouts of shock, gasps of horror or awe or both. Seraphine actually stumbled, catching herself on a pillar as her knees went weak from the pulse of dominance that had just washed over every wolf in the vicinity. Alaric staggered backward as if physically struck. The alpha aura radiating from these 4 children hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just alpha blood. This was royal blood, concentrated, undiluted, pure in a way that happened maybe once every few generations. His wolf was screaming, clawing at his insides, desperate to get to the pups, to protect them, to claim them, to acknowledge what his human mind was still struggling to accept. "Thessaly," he whispered, all the color draining from his face as he looked from the boys to his former mate. His voice cracked, all the kingly composure shattered. "What are these?" "These." Thessaly stepped forward, placing one protective hand on Cassian's small shoulder. The boy leaned into her touch, still glaring at Alaric with those devastating golden eyes. "Are your sons, Alaric?" She gestured to each in turn. Cassian, Theron, Evander, and Lysander. The names fell like stones into still water, ripples of implication spreading through the crowd. 4 names, 4 heirs, 4 alpha-blooded sons from a woman who had been declared barren and cast out like garbage. Seraphine made a sound like a wounded animal. It came from somewhere deep in her chest, raw and desperate. "Bastards!" she shrieked, the word echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The careful facade of the elegant future queen crumbled, revealing something ugly and terrified beneath. She stumbled down the remaining steps, one hand clutching her false belly, the other pointing a shaking finger at Thessaly. "She's lying. She must have slept with a rogue and brought these mongrels here to humiliate the crown. They can't be yours, Alaric. They can't be. She's barren. The healer said so. I was there when Isolde examined her. Every word was a confession she didn't realize she was making." Thessaly watched with cold satisfaction as Seraphine dug her own grave deeper with each panicked syllable. "Do they look like rogues to you, Alaric?" Thessaly asked softly, her voice carrying despite its quietness. "Look at them. Really look. Tell me you don't see yourself in every feature. Tell me your wolf doesn't recognize its own blood." Alaric was shaking, actually trembling like a leaf in a storm as he stared at the four boys. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. Thessaly could see the war happening inside him. Logic versus instinct. Pride versus truth. The political ramifications versus the primal need to acknowledge his offspring. Before he could speak, movement from the VIP section drew every eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with the careful deliberation of extreme age. Elder Corvus, the oldest living wolf in the Obsidian Moon Pack. A man who had served Alaric's grandfather and seen 3 generations of Shadowthorn kings rise and fall. He walked with a cane, his spine bent with years, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. He crossed the ballroom in the hushed silence, ignoring Seraphine's continued sputtering, ignoring the cameras and the whispers. He stopped directly in front of Cassian. For a long moment, the ancient wolf simply stared at the child. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to his knees. The movement was painful, arthritic joints protesting, but he didn't stop until he was kneeling on the marble with his head bowed and his neck exposed in the ultimate gesture of submission. Elder Corvus. Seraphine's voice pitched into hysteria. "What are you doing? Stand up. Stand up right now. They're nothing. They're lies made flesh." The old wolf didn't acknowledge her. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his entire body language radiating reverence. "I cannot stand." His voice was raspy with age, but clear. "The blood calls. It is pure. It is concentrated in a way I have not felt since the old kings walked these halls." He finally looked up, not at Thessaly or Seraphine, but at Alaric. "My king. These are not just your sons. This is a quadruplet alpha strain. It has not been seen in 500 years, not since the founding of the Northern Territories. They are a blessing from the moon goddess herself." The words landed like bombs. A quadruplet alpha strain. Every wolf in the room understood what that meant. 4 alpha-blooded children born from a single pregnancy was a statistical impossibility, a genetic miracle so rare it had passed into legend. And when it did occur, it marked a bloodline chosen by fate itself for greatness, or destruction. Because 4 alphas raised together either became an unstoppable force or tore each other and everything around them to shreds in the struggle for dominance. Alaric took a step forward, then another. His hand reached out, trembling, toward Cassian's dark hair. The boy watched him with those 2 knowing eyes, neither welcoming nor rejecting the touch. "My sons." The words came out broken, barely audible. Alaric's voice cracked completely on the second word. His hand was inches from Cassian's head when another hand shot out and slapped it away with a crack that echoed through the silent ballroom. Thessaly stood between Alaric and the children, her violet eyes blazing with fury that had been banked for 5 years and was now roaring to life. "Don't you dare!" The words came out as a snarl, her wolf so close to the surface that her canines elongated slightly. "Don't you dare rewrite history. Don't you dare act like the victim here." Alaric's hand fell to his side. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd walked into the ballroom. Saw the steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. Saw the fire in her eyes that exile and suffering had forged into something unbreakable. "You threw me out." Thessaly's voice rose, each word a whip crack of accusation. "You stripped me of my title, my pack, my home. You told me I was a dead branch, a useless, broken vessel not worthy of your bloodline. You didn't want me. You wanted a broodmare. And when you thought I couldn't perform that function, you discarded me like trash." Her chest heaved with the force of emotions she'd kept locked down for so long. Behind her, she felt Cassian press against her leg, offering silent support. The other 3 boys had moved closer, forming a protective semicircle around their mother. "I was told you were Barren." Alaric's voice rose to match hers, pain morphing into defensive anger because that was easier than facing the magnitude of what he'd done. "Isolde showed me the test results, showed me the scans. Your womb was dark," she said. "Cursed. I had a duty to the pack to produce an heir, and so you replaced me before my side of the bed was cold." Thessaly shot back. 5 years later, here you are, celebrating a pregnancy that hasn't even reached the first trimester. She gestured toward Seraphine, who had gone corpse pale. "While your actual heirs, 4 of them, have been raised without a father because you couldn't be bothered to verify the lies you were fed." "I didn't know," Alaric roared, his alpha aura exploding outward in a wave of dominance that made every wolf in the room drop their eyes. "I didn't know you were carrying my children. You didn't care enough to check." Thessaly roared back, and her own aura rose to meet his. Not Alpha King caliber, but strong enough, fierce enough, backed by 5 years of survival and maternal rage. "You took the word of a healer who was on Seraphine's payroll." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Every head in the room swiveled toward Seraphine, who looked like she might vomit or faint or both. "Lies. She's slandering me. She's a rogue with delusions and bastards she's trying to foist on the crown." Alaric turned slowly to look at Seraphine. The expression on his face was terrifying in its complete absence of emotion. It promised violence, promised consequences, promised a reckoning that would be biblical in scope. But before he could speak, before he could take a single step toward the woman who had apparently orchestrated the destruction of his true mate bond, Cassian moved. The 4-year-old stepped between his warring parents, tiny hands fisted at his sides. "Mom." His voice had dropped back to something closer to a child's register, but the authority in it remained. "I'm hungry. And this place smells like sour milk." He turned his head to glare at Seraphine with an expression of pure disgust that would have been comical if it weren't so devastatingly accurate. Thessaly took a deep breath, forcing her wolf back down, forcing her rage into the locked box where she'd kept it contained for 5 years. She smoothed her dress, her hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. "You're right, baby. We should go." She turned to Silas, who had remained statue still by the entrance, ready to intervene if needed. "Get the boys to the car." Alaric stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. His alpha aura flared again, instinctively trying to command her to stay. "You're not taking my heirs anywhere. They belong to the pack. They belong to the crown." The presumption of it, the sheer audacity of claiming ownership after everything, made Thessaly want to laugh or scream or possibly rip his throat out with her teeth. She stepped into his space instead, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that his scent wrapped around her and made her wolf whine with confused longing. "I am not a pack member, Alaric." Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the ballroom. "I am a rogue. You made me one. And these boys, they carry the name Vance, not Shadowthorn. They don't belong to your pack or your crown." She let her eyes flash violet again. Let him see the alpha female that had been dormant but never dead. "If you try to keep us here against our will, I will bring down the wrath of the Lycan Council. I will sue you for custody in human court, where your alpha dominance means nothing. And I will challenge you for leadership in Wolf Court, where I will have 4 alphas, their mother, and every ounce of rage you've earned standing behind me." The threat was insane, suicidal. A rogue challenging an alpha king for his throne was unheard of. But Thessaly meant every word, and Alaric could see it in her eyes, could scent it in the absolute conviction rolling off her in waves. "Do you really want to fight 4 alphas and their mother?" she asked softly. "Do you really want that kind of war?" Alaric's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. He looked at the boys who were watching him with expressions ranging from hostility to calculation. If he forced them to stay, they would hate him, would see him as the tyrant who imprisoned their mother. Any chance of building a relationship with his sons would die before it began. Stay. The word came out rough, almost pleading. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then fell away when she flinched back. "Please, not as prisoners, as guests." He swallowed hard, pride warring with desperation. "Give me a chance to know them. The solstice ball is in 2 days. Stay until then. Just the weekend." Thessaly looked at her sons. Theron was eyeing the buffet table with undisguised longing despite his earlier complaint about the smell. Evander looked exhausted, his violet eyes dimmed from the effort of being around so many foreign wolves. Cassian and Lysander were watching her, waiting for her decision, trusting her to choose correctly. 2 days. She could survive 2 days in this place, could give her sons the chance to see where they came from, to understand their heritage, could perhaps find proof of what Seraphine had done, evidence that would destroy the false queen before she could sink her claws any deeper into the throne. Fine. The word came out, clipped, cold. "We stay for the weekend, but we stay in the East Wing, and Seraphine comes nowhere near us or my children. And if you raise your voice to them, Alaric, if you so much as make one of them cry, I will rip your throat out myself. Are we clear, Crystal?" Relief washed over his face so completely it was almost painful to witness. He stepped aside, gesturing to his beta who had appeared at his elbow. "Escort them to the royal guest suites in the East Wing. Full security detail. No one enters without Miss Ravenshade's explicit permission. Thessaly gathered her sons with a look, and they fell into formation around her. Silas took point, leading them through the crowd that parted like the Red Sea. Thessaly kept her head high, refused to acknowledge the stares and whispers, the phones still recording every moment. As they reached the doorway, she allowed herself one glance back. Alaric stood in the center of the ruined celebration, his fists clenched at his sides, watching them leave with an expression of such profound loss. It made something twist in her chest, despite everything. Seraphine had collapsed into one of the thrones, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. The crowd was already fracturing into groups, gossip spreading like wildfire. This party was over, the pregnancy announcement forgotten. The entire carefully orchestrated event destroyed by the arrival of 4 small boys, and the woman everyone had written off as broken. Thessaly smiled. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let Alaric lie awake tonight, contemplating the weight of his mistakes. Because tomorrow, the real games would begin. And this time, she was playing to win. The East Wing was a fortress disguised as luxury. Thessaly walked through the suite of rooms that had been prepared for visiting dignitaries, her heels sinking into carpet so thick it felt like walking on clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the mountains, now painted silver by moonlight, marble bathrooms with heated floors. A living area larger than her first apartment, and in the adjoining room, 4 beds that her sons had already claimed, bouncing on mattresses that cost more than most cars. Silas posted himself outside the main door, arms crossed, expression carved from granite. I don't like this. His voice carried through the cracked door. Being in his territory, under his protection. It feels like a trap. It probably is. Thessaly poured herself water from the crystal carafe on the nightstand, her hands steadier than she felt. But we're here now, and I meant what I said. 2 days. We gather what we need, let the boys see their heritage, and then we disappear again. And if he doesn't let you leave, then I'll remind him why rogues are dangerous. She set the glass down, catching her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back looked harder than she remembered. 5 years of clawing her way up from nothing had carved away the softness, left only edges and angles and violet eyes that promised retribution. We didn't survive this long by being weak, Silas. A soft knock interrupted them, not the aggressive pounding of guards or authority. This was tentative, almost apologetic. Thessaly's wolf stirred, recognizing the scent even through solid oak. Cedar and smoke, and something darker now. Regret, maybe. Or fear. Go away, Alaric. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The walls in the East Wing were thick, but wolf hearing was exceptional. I brought food. His voice came through the wood, muffled but clear. The boys didn't eat at the party. I thought they might be hungry. Thessaly's first instinct was to refuse, to send him away with the same cold dismissal he'd given her 5 years ago. But then she heard Theron's stomach growl from the adjoining room, heard Cassian whisper something about being starving, and maternal instinct overrode pride. She unlocked the door, opened it just wide enough to see him. Alaric stood in the hallway holding a silver tray piled absurdly high with burgers, fries, and chocolate milkshakes. It was so domestic, so incongruous with the image of the cold Alpha King, that for a moment she could only stare. I remember you used to crave burgers after pack meetings. He said it quietly, almost sheepishly, after anything stressful. I thought maybe the boys might have inherited that. The fact that he remembered, that he'd kept that small detail locked in his memory for 5 years, did something complicated to her chest. Thessaly pushed the feeling down, hardened her expression. I'm not the one in crisis, Alaric. You are. She opened the door wider, let him enter but stayed cold, distant. Alaric set the tray on the coffee table, his movements careful, controlled. When he turned back to her, the arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost and was still trying to convince himself it was real. They're magnificent. His voice cracked slightly on the word. Cassian, the way he commanded the room at 4 years old. That shouldn't be possible, Thessaly. That level of dominance doesn't manifest until puberty at the earliest. They're strong because they had to be. Thessaly crossed her arms, a defensive barrier between them. They had to protect me when I had nothing, when the world wasn't kind to a lone woman with 4 pups and no pack to shield her. Alaric flinched like she'd struck him. I sent trackers. After you left, after a month when my wolf wouldn't stop howling, I sent my best trackers to find you, to make sure you were alive. They couldn't find a trace. I didn't want to be found. The words came out harder than she intended. I went where wolves don't look. Human cities. Human hospitals. Human systems that don't care about pack law or mate bonds or alpha bloodlines. Silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of words unsaid, wounds unhealed. Alaric's hands clenched at his sides, his wolf clearly fighting for control. The healer, Isolde. She disappeared 3 days after you were exiled. I thought she'd retired to the coast, bought a cottage somewhere quiet. Thessaly raised an eyebrow. A cottage on a pack healer's salary? Exactly. Alaric's eyes darkened with something dangerous. I sent my Delta to find her tonight. After your accusation, we pulled her financial records. She bought a villa in the south of France, paid cash, $2 million that she couldn't possibly have earned legitimately. The confirmation should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just made Thessaly tired. So you were blind. You were young, stupid, and pressured by the council to produce an heir. Seraphine was always there, whispering poison in your ear, and you let her. I know. The admission came out raw, stripped of pretense, and I will spend the rest of my life atoning for it. But please, Thessaly, let me know them. Let me be their father. You can try. She kept her voice neutral, refused to give him the absolution he was seeking. But trust is earned, Alaric, and right now, your account is severely overdrawn. Before he could respond, a scream shattered the night. It came from the boys' room, high-pitched and terrified, the kind of sound that turned every parental instinct into a weapon. Thessaly moved on pure instinct, Alaric half a step behind her. They burst through the connecting door to find chaos. Theron was sitting up in bed screaming, clutching his stomach. Lysander was on the floor, vomiting, his small body convulsing. Cassian had Evander pressed against the wall, away from the windows, his 4-year-old body vibrating with protective fury. What happened? Thessaly's voice came out as a command, sharp enough to cut through panic. She rushed to Theron, her hands already glowing with the weak healing magic she developed over years of necessity. The juice. Cassian's voice was a growl, his eyes blazing gold as he pointed to the nightstand. The maid brought juice boxes. Said they were from you. Lysander drank his. Theron took 3 sips before I smelled it. Alaric grabbed the discarded juice box, his movements preternaturally fast. He brought it to his nose, inhaled deeply, and went absolutely still. The kind of stillness that preceded violence. Wolfsbane. His voice dropped into a register that made the windows rattle. Concentrated liquid wolfsbane. Thessaly's world narrowed to Theron's face, pale and sweating, his small hands digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. It hurts, Mommy. Make it stop. Please make it stop. I know, baby. I know. Tears streamed down her face as the healing light pulsed from her palms, weak and inadequate against poison this potent. Her magic had never been strong, just enough to soothe minor injuries, to ease fevers. Not enough for this. Guards. Alaric's roar shook the stone walls, rattled the chandelier. The sound of an alpha king whose children had been attacked, whose most primal instincts had been triggered. The door slammed open, armed wolves pouring in with weapons drawn. Get the royal physician. Now. And find out who delivered those juice boxes. I want names. I want locations. I want them alive so I can kill them slowly. His beta appeared in the doorway, already on his phone coordinating. Alaric thrust the poisoned container at him. Keep this safe. Evidence. If anyone other than the doctor tries to enter this room, kill them. I don't care if it's the Prime Minister himself. Where are you going? Thessaly looked up from Theron, her hands still glowing uselessly, her heart shattering as her son whimpered in pain. Alaric walked to the window that Cassian had been watching. He looked out toward the west wing, toward the Queen's chambers where Seraphine would be hiding or celebrating or both. His reflection in the glass was monstrous, eyes fully wolf, canines elongated, every line of his body promising slaughter. To get the antidote, his voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way that meant he was barely holding on to his humanity. And then I'm going to remind Seraphine why they call me the Butcher of the North. He didn't use the door. He simply smashed through the window in a shower of glass and moonlight, shifting midair into a massive black wolf that hit the ground running. His howl tore through the estate, a sound of pure rage that made every wolf within 10 miles drop to their belly in instinctive terror. Thessaly held her sick children, rocking Theron while the physician worked on Lysander, while Cassian and Evander pressed close on either side. But she wasn't just afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only cold, crystalline fury. Alaric would interrogate Seraphine, would look for proof, for confessions, for evidence to present to the council. Because he was a king, bound by laws and politics, and the need for legitimacy. But Thessaly was a rogue, a mother whose children had been poisoned, and rogues didn't need proof. They needed shovels. She looked at Silas, who stood in the doorway covered in the blood of the maid who delivered the poison, and wouldn't be answering questions for anyone. Watch the boys. Her voice came out cold, detached, the tone of a CEO who'd built an empire on the bones of those who'd underestimated her. Thessaly. Silas's warning was clear. You can't go out there. Thessaly walked to her suitcase, the one with the false bottom that customs never found. She pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a vial of clear liquid that caught the light like captured lightning. Vance Alchemic's most dangerous creation. A serum that stripped a wolf of their ability to shift. Permanent neutralization. Alaric wants to play king, she said, clutching the vial like a weapon. Wants to follow protocol and gather evidence. But protocol Won't save my sons. Won't make Seraphine pay for what she's done. She walked to the door, her heels crunching on broken glass. I don't need a trial. I need revenge. The physician looked up from where he was forcing an emetic down Lysander's throat. The wolfsbane concentration is high, but not lethal. Not to alpha blood this strong. They'll survive, but they need the antidote within the hour or the damage could be permanent. 1 hour. Thessaly checked her watch. Plenty of time. She stepped into the hallway where chaos had erupted. Guards running toward the sounds of Alaric's rampage in the lower courtyards. Servants fleeing. The entire castle on high alert as their king lost his mind hunting for the woman who'd poisoned his heirs. Perfect cover. Thessaly moved through the corridors like a phantom, not running, because running attracted attention. Walking with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged, who had every right to be there. Her heels clicked rhythmically on stone, a countdown to destruction. The West Wing was usually heavily guarded, but the chaos downstairs had stripped the hallways bare. Every warrior who could hold a weapon had been pulled to contain or assist their rampaging king. Thessaly reached the mahogany doors of the Queen's suite unopposed. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She placed her hand on the lock and applied a single drop of corrosive acid from her alchemist's kit, another Vance product. The lock melted with a quiet hiss. The door swung open. Seraphine was inside, frantically shoving jewelry and cash into a designer duffel bag. She was still wearing her white gown, now stained with wine and desperation. The pillow that had created her fake pregnancy bump lay discarded on the bed like evidence of her lies. She froze when the door clicked shut, spun around, eyes widening in genuine fear when she saw Thessaly standing there, backlit by hallway lights, holding something that glinted silver in the shadows. How did you get past the guards? Seraphine's voice pitched high, her hands curling into claws. Thessaly smiled. It wasn't a nice expression. Alaric is currently dismantling your security detail downstairs. He's quite upset about his sons being poisoned. You should hear the screaming. Seraphine let out a nervous laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I don't know what you're talking about. Whatever happened to those brats was probably their own fault. Rogue sickness. Thessaly walked further into the room, her footsteps deliberate. She surveyed the luxury with cold assessment. Silk drapes, gold vanity, a closet overflowing with designer clothes. You have everything, Seraphine. The title, the money, the king's attention. Why did you have to touch my children? Because they're threats. The facade shattered completely. Seraphine's beautiful face twisted into something ugly and desperate. Alaric was finally forgetting you, finally looking at me like I mattered. And then you waltz back in with 4 carbon copies of him. If they live, my child will never be king. Thessaly tilted her head, inhaling deeply. She'd spent 5 years learning to read sense the way other wolves read body language. That's strange. I smell fear. I smell greed. I smell expensive perfume. But I don't smell a second heartbeat. Seraphine went pale. Her hand flew instinctively to her stomach, to the flat abdomen hidden beneath her dress. You're not pregnant. The realization should have shocked her, but somehow Thessaly had known, had suspected from the moment she'd seen that carefully positioned hand, that practiced pose. It's a pillow and a spell, smoke and mirrors. It doesn't matter. Seraphine shrieked, all pretense abandoned. I would have been pregnant once we were married, once the mating ceremony was complete next week. I would have given him an heir eventually, but you ruined it. You and your abominations. Seraphine lunged. Her wolf rose close to surface, beta strength enhanced by desperation and rage. Claws extended, aiming for Thessaly's face, for her throat, for anything vulnerable. Thessaly sidestepped. 5 years of surviving in the human world, of building an empire while raising 4 superpowered children, had taught her reflexes that no pampered socialite could match. She caught Seraphine's wrist mid-swipe, twisted it behind her back with a sickening crack, and drove the false queen to her knees on the plush carpet. You poisoned my sons with wolfsbane. Thessaly's voice was conversational, almost pleasant as she held Seraphine against the floor. Do you know what I have in this vial? Go to hell! Seraphine spat, still struggling despite the broken wrist. Wrong answer. Thessaly pulled out the syringe, the clear liquid inside glowing with faint blue luminescence. This is something we developed at Vance Alchemics for rogue wolves who've lost their minds to the feral state. It binds to the lycanthropy gene, severs the connection to the moon. It doesn't kill you, but it kills the wolf. Permanently. Seraphine stopped struggling. Her eyes went wide with a terror so pure it was almost beautiful. For a werewolf, losing their wolf was worse than death. It meant becoming human, powerless, prey in a world of predators. No. The word came out broken. Please, I'll tell you where the antidote is. It's in the safe behind the painting. Code 7741. Please, Thessaly, don't take my wolf. 7741. Thessaly repeated calmly. Thank you. Please. Seraphine dissolved into sobs. I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll never come back. Thessaly looked down at the woman who had destroyed her life 5 years ago, who had poisoned her, lied about her, stolen her mate and her home, who had just tried to murder 4 innocent children to protect a throne built on deception. She remembered the snow, remembered crawling until her fingers bled, remembered Theron's screams 10 minutes ago. You took my womb. Thessaly said coldly, or so you thought. So I'm taking your claws. She plunged the needle into Seraphine's neck and depressed the plunger. The shriek that followed started as a wolf's howl and ended as a human scream. Seraphine's body convulsed as the magic was ripped from her blood, as her wolf died thrashing inside her skin. Her eyes, once flashing red with beta power, dulled to flat, muddy brown. Thessaly stood, smoothing her dress. She walked to the painting of the full moon, swung it aside, punched in the code. Inside the safe sat a small vial of blue liquid. The antidote. She grabbed it, then turned back to Seraphine, who lay curled in fetal position on the expensive rug, weeping, shivering, completely, utterly human. You're not a wolf anymore. Thessaly's voice held no satisfaction, no triumph, just cold fact. You're just a girl in a stolen dress. She walked out, leaving the door unlocked. Let Alaric find her like this. Let him see what happened to those who threatened her children. Thessaly was done playing by rules written by men who thought mothers were soft. She ran back to the east wing barefoot, her heels abandoned, the antidote clutched against her chest like salvation itself. Thessaly burst through the door just as Alaric arrived from the opposite direction. He was covered in blood, none of it his own, wearing torn trousers he must have grabbed from a guard after shifting back. His chest heaved, eyes still more wolf than man, his entire body vibrating with barely restrained violence. Their gazes locked. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, two parents who had failed and fought and were now racing against time to save their children. "Did you find her?" Alaric's voice was raw, shredded from howling. "Did she talk?" "I got it." Thessaly held up the blue vial, and relief crashed over his face so completely it made him stagger. They rushed together to the bed where Theron and Lysander lay pale and shaking, their small bodies racked with tremors. The royal physician hovered nearby, his face grim, hands glowing with healing magic that was barely keeping the poison at bay. Evander and Cassian sat on either side of their brothers, holding their hands, tears streaming down faces too young to understand betrayal, but old enough to recognize danger. Cassian looked up when Alaric approached, and for the first time, his golden eyes held something other than hostility. "Daddy." The word came out as a wheeze from Theron's cracked lips. "Daddy, it hurts." The sound of his son calling him that for the first time shattered something in Alaric's chest. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his massive frame shaking. "I'm here." His voice broke completely. "I'm here, son. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Give it to them." Thessaly commanded, thrusting the vial into his trembling hands. Half for Theron, half for Lysander. Now. Alaric uncorked the vial with his teeth, hands too unsteady for fine motor control. He gently lifted Theron's head, cradling it with a tenderness that contradicted every inch of his warrior build. "Drink, brave one. It will taste like blueberries. I promise it will make the pain stop." Theron's lips parted, and Alaric carefully poured half the liquid into his mouth. The boy swallowed, coughed, then swallowed again. Then Lysander, who was barely conscious, his violet eyes fluttering. Alaric administered the second dose with the same infinite care, whispering words of comfort that were more prayer than promise. For a terrifying minute, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Even the physician went still, watching, waiting. Thessaly clutched Cassian and Evander against her sides, her heart a drumbeat of terror in her ears. Then color rushed back into Theron's cheeks. He coughed, spitting up a mouthful of black bile, then took a deep, clear breath. His eyes opened fully, the hazel bright and aware instead of glazed with pain. Lysander sat up abruptly, rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken from a nightmare. My tummy stopped hurting. His voice was small, confused, but blessedly normal. Thessaly let out a sob she'd been holding since the moment she'd heard that first scream. She collapsed onto the bed, gathering all four boys into her arms, pressing kisses to their hair, their foreheads, anywhere she could reach. Thank the goddess. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Alaric stayed on his knees, watching them. He felt like an intruder in this sacred circle of maternal love and filial trust. These were his sons, his blood, but he was a stranger to them. Had failed to protect them on their first night in his home. The weight of that failure pressed on his chest like a boulder. Cassian, still held tight in his mother's embrace, looked over her shoulder at Alaric. The boy's golden eyes assessed him with unnerving intelligence. He smashed the window. Cassian said matter-of-factly, pointing to the shattered glass where Alaric had jumped out earlier. I did. Alaric's voice was rough, with unshed tears. He turned into a big wolf. Cassian continued, biggest I've ever seen. His eyes were the same color as mine when he ran. To save you. Alaric swallowed hard, meeting his son's gaze without flinching. I would burn the world to ash to save you, Cassian. All of you. I'm sorry I was too late to stop the poison from hurting you. Silence stretched. Then Cassian wriggled one arm free from his mother's grip and reached out. His small hand, still slightly trembling from the poison's after effects, touched Alaric's rough, blood-stained cheek. You smell like Mom now. The words were simple, but they carried weight beyond their syllables. You smell like Pack. Something inside Alaric cracked open. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch of his son, feeling the bond snap into place. Not the mate bond that connected him to Thessaly, but something older, more primal. The father bond. The blood recognition between alpha and heir. It locked around his heart like chains of gold, unbreakable and eternal. A single tear tracked through the grime on his face. He didn't bother wiping it away. Thessaly watched this moment of connection, her own emotions too tangled to name. Part of her wanted to pull Cassian back to protect him from potential disappointment. But the larger part recognized that her sons needed this, needed to know their father, even if that father was flawed and had made catastrophic mistakes. Alaric. Her voice cut through the moment. His eyes opened, focusing on her with an intensity that made her wolf stir. Thank you for getting here so quickly, for calling the physician. Don't thank me yet. His jaw tightened, and she saw the king reassert itself over the grieving father. We have a bigger problem. Seraphine isn't the only threat. What do you mean? Alaric stood, his gaze moving to the window where, in the distance, blue and red lights were flashing. Not police lights. These were black SUVs with the silver insignia of the High Council of Werewolves. At least a dozen vehicles swarming the main gates. The council is here. His voice went flat, carefully neutral in the way that meant he was already calculating political moves. They didn't come for the party. They came because 4 unregistered alpha children just appeared on royal soil. And because a rogue just neutralized the future queen. Thessaly's blood ran cold. How do you know about Seraphine? I found her 20 minutes ago, still sobbing on her bedroom floor. Human. Powerless. Alaric's eyes held no judgment, only grim acknowledgement. I know that serum, Thessaly. I've seen it used twice in my lifetime on rogues who'd gone feral. It's final. There's no reversing it. Good. Thessaly's voice was steel. She poisoned my children. She deserves worse. I'm not arguing. Alaric moved to the window, his massive frame backlit by moonlight. I would have done the same if you hadn't gotten there first. But the council won't see it that way. To them, you're a rogue who just assaulted a member of the royal court. And these boys, he gestured to the 4 children now watching with wide, worried eyes. To the council, they're not a blessing. They're a threat to the entire hierarchy. Why? Cassian's voice was small but firm. Why are we a threat? Because 4 alphas in 1 litter hasn't happened in 500 years. Alaric knelt again, this time addressing all 4 boys directly. When it does happen, it means incredible power. But power scares people. Makes them do stupid, cruel things to protect themselves. They want to kill us. Lysander said it without inflection, a statement of fact rather than fear. Don't they? Alaric's silence was answer enough. Over my dead body. Thessaly stood, her violet eyes blazing. She moved to stand between her sons and the window, as if her body alone could shield them from the approaching vehicles. They'll have to go through me first. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then pounding on the door, aggressive and official. "Open up. By order of the High Council, we have a warrant for the arrest of Thessaly Ravenshade and the immediate custody of 4 unregistered minor lycanthropes." The boys whimpered, pressing together on the bed. Evander's hands started to glow violet, his power responding to fear. Cassian's eyes flashed gold. The air pressure in the room began to shift as their collective aura rose defensively. Alaric turned from the window, and his eyes were no longer human. They had shifted to deep, swirling crimson, the color that only appeared in Alpha Kings when their most primal instincts were triggered. His presence expanded, filling the room like thunder, like the moment before lightning strikes. Silas. His voice dropped to a sub-vocal command that vibrated in bone marrow. "Take the boys into the bathroom. Lock the door. Put headphones on them. They don't need to hear what's about to happen." "What are you going to do?" Thessaly asked, stepping beside him. Her own aura rose to meet his, not as strong but fierce, backed by 5 years of survival and maternal rage. Alaric ripped his shirt off, revealing the intricate tattoo of the royal crest that covered his chest. The black wolf, crowned in silver, eyes of ruby, surrounded by Latin script that proclaimed his lineage back 7 generations. "I'm going to remind the council who sits on this throne." His voice was barely human, more growl than words. "Nobody takes my pups. Nobody." He strode to the door and threw it open with enough force to crack the frame. Standing in the hallway were 12 council enforcers, heavily armed with silver-tipped spears and suppression collars. Behind them stood Elder Corvus, looking grim, and a tall, thin man in a gray suit that screamed bureaucrat. Councilman Malachar, Alaric's longtime political rival. King Alaric. Malachar's smile was thin, vulpine. "Step aside. The rogue woman has committed treason against the crown's consort, and the children must be tested for stability before they can be allowed to remain at large." Alaric didn't step aside. He stepped forward, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The rogue woman is not a rogue." His voice boomed, echoing off stone walls, rattling the medieval tapestries. "She is the true queen, my mate, the Luna of this pack, and the children are not for testing. They are my heirs, my sons, royal blood. They are abominations." Malachar's facade cracked, revealing the fear beneath. "Quadruplets. It's unnatural. A genetic aberration. They must be culled before they mature and tear this territory apart, fighting for dominance." At the word culled, the air itself seemed to solidify. From inside the suite came a sound that made every enforcer take an involuntary step backward. Not a growl, a harmonic resonance. 4 young voices blending into something that bypassed ears and went straight to primal hindbrain. The boys had heard, and they were not pleased. Thessaly appeared in the doorway behind Alaric, and she wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding her phone, screen bright, showing a live video feed. "If you want to cull my sons," her voice dropped into a demonic contralto that was purely wolf, "you will have to burn this entire castle down with me inside it." She raised the phone higher, turning it so Malachar could see his own face on the screen. "I'm live streaming this to the Global Shifter Network. Say hello to 3 million viewers. And counting." Malachar's face went sheet white. The comments section on the screen was already exploding. "They want to kill the pups? That's the CEO of Vance Alchemics. She's the rejected mate. Down with the council. Protect the royal blood. The view counter ticked up rapidly. 3.2 million. 3.5. 4 million. This is preposterous. Malachar sputtered, trying to shield his face with a manicured hand. Turn that off immediately, Miss Ravenshade. You're violating council protocol. I'm protecting my children from a coup. Thessaly stepped closer, the camera tracking Malachar's every movement. Tell the world, councilman. Why do you want to cull 4 healthy alpha heirs? Is it because they're unstable? Or is it because 4 strong sons make King Alaric's throne unshakable, and you prefer a king who's weak and desperate? Malachar's eyes darted around, looking for support from the enforcers. But they stood frozen, uncertain. These were warriors, yes, but they were also pack members. The idea of harming pups, royal pups, went against every instinct, and with millions watching, following these orders would make them pariahs. King Alaric. Malachar turned back to the Alpha, voice pitched with desperation. Control your mate. Alaric laughed. It was a dark, dangerous sound that made the chandeliers shake. Control her? He stepped up beside Thessaly, his shoulder brushing hers in a gesture of united front. I couldn't control her if I wanted to. She is the strongest wolf in this hallway. And she's right to question your motives. A commotion at the end of the corridor. Alaric's beta, Jackson, came running with a tablet clutched in one hand. My king. He skidded to a stop, breathing hard. We found the financial trails, the payments to healer Isolde 5 years ago. He held up the tablet, turning it so everyone could see. Bank statements, wire transfers, a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. They didn't just come from Seraphine's private accounts. They were routed through a company owned by Councilman Malachar. The hallway went silent. Even the live stream comments seemed to freeze for a split second before exploding with renewed fury. Thessaly lowered the phone slightly, looking at Malachar with genuine disgust. You. It wasn't just Seraphine. You orchestrated this 5 years ago. You paid to have me declared Barren. It was politics. Malachar's voice pitched into a shriek as his careful plans unraveled in real time. Alaric was too young, too aggressive. We needed a manageable bloodline. Seraphine was pliable. You were a variable we couldn't control. Making you Barren was necessary for the stability of the Northern Territories. You stole 5 years of my life. Alaric's voice dropped to a subsonic rumble that made the windows vibrate. You stole my sons' childhoods. You stole their right to know their father. He moved. Not a walk. Not even a run. Pure alpha speed. Too fast for human eyes to track properly. Before the enforcers could raise their weapons, before Malachar could even scream, Alaric had him by the throat, lifted the tall man 3 feet off the ground and slammed him against the stone wall with enough force to crack the mortar. I invoke the right of kings. Alaric's voice boomed through the castle, through the phone speakers to millions of viewers worldwide. The ancient law that predated the council, that gave Alpha Kings absolute authority in matters of treason against the royal bloodline. The enforcers immediately dropped to one knee, lowering their heads. They had no choice. The right of kings was sacred, unbreakable, written in the first treaties when wolves still believed gods walked among them. Councilman Malachar. Alaric's grip tightened, cutting off air. For treason against the crown. For conspiracy to harm the royal heirs. For the poisoning of my mate's reputation and the theft of 5 years that can never be returned. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that the phone's microphone barely caught. I strip you of your rank. I strip you of your citizenship. I strip you of the protection of pack law. He released his grip slightly, just enough for Malachar to gasp in air. Run. The word was soft, almost gentle. You have 10 minutes to cross the border. After that, I declare open season. Every wolf in my territory will be within their rights to hunt you. Alaric dropped him. Malachar collapsed to the floor, gasping, his expensive suit rumpled and stained with fear sweat. He looked at the enforcers, but they kept their heads down, refusing to meet his gaze. He looked at the phone, at the millions watching his disgrace in real time. Then he scrambled to his feet and ran. The sound of his cowardly footsteps echoed through the corridor, fading into the distance. Thessaly ended the live stream. The final view count was 6.2 million. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Alaric turned to the enforcers. Get out of my sight. Guard the perimeter. If Malachar isn't gone in 10 minutes, bring me his head. Yes, my king. They scattered like leaves in a storm, desperate to be anywhere but under his wrathful gaze. Only Elder Corvus remained. The ancient wolf looked at Alaric, then at Thessaly, then at the doorway where 4 small faces peered out with wide, frightened eyes. The old ways are not always wrong, my king. Corvus's voice was soft but firm. Sometimes the moon goddess sends us trials not to break us, but to forge us into what we must become. He bowed his head to Thessaly. Welcome home, my queen. He turned and walked away, leaning heavily on his cane, leaving Alaric and Thessaly alone in the hallway. The adrenaline drained out of Thessaly all at once, leaving her shaking. She leaned against the doorframe, her legs suddenly unreliable. We won. The words came out dazed, disbelieving. We actually won. Alaric reached out, his hand hovering near her waist, not quite touching. Are you all right? No. She laughed, but it sounded broken. My children were poisoned. I neutralized a woman. I live streamed a political coup to millions of strangers. I'm very far from all right, Alaric. I know. His hand finally made contact, warm and steady against her lower back. But you're safe. They're safe. That's what matters. Is it? Thessaly looked up at him, violet eyes swimming with exhaustion and something more complicated. This doesn't fix us. You know that, right? Defeating Malachar doesn't erase 5 years. Doesn't undo what you said to me that night in the snow. I know. Alaric's voice was raw with honesty. I don't expect it to. But please, Thessaly, don't leave tonight. The boys are sick. You're exhausted. Stay, just until morning. We can figure out the rest later. Thessaly looked at her sons, who were creeping out of the bathroom now that the danger had passed. Theron and Lysander still looked pale, but recovering. Cassian and Evander were holding their hands protectively. They needed rest, needed safety, needed to not be uprooted again so soon. One night. She agreed. But this doesn't mean I'm staying, Alaric. This doesn't mean I forgive you. I understand. Relief flooded his features anyway. One night is more than I deserve. The boys rushed to her, and she gathered them close, breathing in their scent. Safe. Alive. Hers. Alaric stood apart, watching with an expression of longing so profound it made Thessaly's chest ache despite everything. They put the boys to bed in fresh rooms, far from the broken window and the lingering scent of wolfsbane. Silas posted himself outside with explicit orders to kill anyone who approached. The physician checked them one final time and declared them out of danger, the antidote having purged the poison completely. Thessaly sat on the edge of the master bedroom, staring at the door that connected to the boys' suite. Every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were still shaking slightly from adrenaline crash. A soft knock. Alaric stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. Not from Seraphine, from the kitchens. I watched them make it myself. Just chamomile and honey. She accepted it because her throat was raw from screaming, from sobbing, from live streaming a revolution. Thank you. He sat on the opposite end of the bed, careful to maintain distance. I issued a decree tonight, restoring your status. You're not a rogue, Thessaly. You're the Luna of this pack. You always were. Thessaly set the tea down, untouched. I have a company in Seattle. I have a life I built from nothing. I can't just play queen because you signed a paper. I know. Alaric reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. That's why I'm not asking you to stay as my subject. I'm asking you to stay as my equal. He opened the pouch. Inside was a key. This is the key to the council chambers. I'm dissolving the High Council, replacing it with a diarchy. King and queen. Equal veto power. Equal authority. You keep your company. Move the headquarters here if you want. We rule together. Not you behind me. Beside me. Thessaly stared at the key. It was a tempting offer. Not for the power, though that would be useful, but for the change it represented. A complete restructuring of pack politics, giving her the authority to protect her sons, to ensure no other woman was ever victimized the way she had been. And us? She asked quietly. What are we in this arrangement? Business partners? Alaric shifted closer, not touching but near enough that his scent wrapped around her. Cedar and smoke and something darker now. Regret. Hope. We are mates, Thessaly. The moon goddess chose us for each other, and I threw that away because I was young and stupid and listened to poisoned counsel. He took a shaky breath. I broke us. I know that. I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to fix it. I will court you properly. I will earn your trust again. I won't touch you until you ask me to. But I will never let you go again. Never. Thessaly looked at him. Really looked. Saw the boy she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, now carved into harder angles by kingship and mistakes. Saw genuine remorse in every line of his face. Saw the father who'd smashed through a window and hunted through blood to save his sons. She also saw the man who'd thrown her into the snow, who'd believed lies over the evidence of their bond, who'd replaced her before the sheets were cold. We try. The words came out careful, measured. One day at a time. You court me. You prove yourself. To me and to our sons. And if you fail, if you hurt them or disappoint them or make them feel unwanted, I take them and leave. Understood? Understood. Alaric's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. Thessaly picked up the key, feeling its weight. You haven't earned anything. This is probation, Alaric, not absolution. I'll take it. He stood, moving toward the door. Sleep well, Thessaly. If you need anything, anything at all, I'm 3 doors down. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Thessaly sat alone in the too large bed, holding the key that represented a future she'd never imagined. Queen Luna, partner to the man who destroyed her and now wanted to rebuild what he'd broken. She set the key on the nightstand and lay down, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of guards patrolling, of the estate settling into wary peace after a night of chaos. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The council would need restructuring. Seraphine would need to be dealt with officially. The world would want answers about the viral video that had exposed corruption at the highest levels of Lycan government. But tonight, her sons were safe. The poison was purged. The immediate threats were neutralized. And for the first time in 5 years, Thessaly allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, broken things could be made whole again, if the person trying to fix them was willing to bleed for it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything gold. Thessaly woke to the sound of laughter from the boys' room. She found all 4 of them piled into one bed, watching cartoons on a screen that was definitely too large for any normal bedroom. Alaric sat in a chair nearby, watching them with an expression of wonder and yearning. He looked like he hadn't slept, shadows under his eyes, still wearing the same torn trousers from last night. "Daddy brought pancakes," Theron announced, pointing to a room service cart loaded with food. "They have chocolate chips." Thessaly's heart did something complicated at hearing her son call Alaric Daddy so naturally, like the title had always belonged to him. She caught Alaric's gaze, saw the gratitude there, the awareness that this was a gift he didn't deserve but would treasure anyway. 8 months. That's how long it took for the walls to come down. 8 months of Alaric showing up every morning with breakfast. 8 months of him respecting boundaries, keeping his distance, earning trust one small gesture at a time. He read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters. He taught Cassian strategy and Theron combat forms. He sat with Evander during meditation, helping the sensitive boy learn to control his overwhelming empathic abilities. He played chess with Lysander and never let him win, which the boy appreciated more than easy victories. He courted Thessaly with the patience of stone wearing down underwater. Notes left on her desk at the new Ravenshade alchemics headquarters she'd built on Packlands. Flowers in her favorite colors. Respect for her space and her autonomy. In month 4, she let him hold her hand during a pack meeting. In month 6, she kissed his cheek when he brought her coffee exactly how she liked it. In month 7, their fingers brushed reaching for the same document, and neither pulled away. In month 8, after tucking the boys into bed, Thessaly found Alaric on the balcony, staring at the moon. She walked up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and pressed her cheek against his broad back. He froze, hardly daring to breathe. "Thessaly, I'm ready," she whispered. "I'm ready to try again. Really try." He turned in her arms, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "Are you sure? Because I can wait longer. I can wait forever if that's what you need." Thessaly answered by pulling his head down and kissing him. Not soft, not tentative, deep and claiming and full of 5 years of loneliness and longing finally finding release. The mate bond that had been dormant, suppressed, denied, roared to life between them. Golden light exploded from where their bodies touched, the moon goddess's blessing made visible. Alaric groaned into her mouth, his wolf howling in triumph, his arms banding around her like he'd never let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, He rested his forehead against hers. I love you. I never stopped. Not for a single moment in 5 years. I know. Thessaly's hands tangled in his hair. And I hate that I never stopped loving you either, even when I wanted to, even when you deserved my hatred more than my love. I'll spend my life being worthy of you, he promised. Both of you, the queen and the woman, the mother and the mate, you better. She pulled him toward the bedroom. Because if you break my heart again, Alaric Shadowthorn, I will do far worse than strip your wolf. I will strip your kingdom, your crown, and every shred of dignity you have left. Promise. He grinned, and she saw a flash of the boy she'd fallen for. The one who'd laughed easily and loved fiercely before politics and duty had hardened him. They made love that night with the kind of desperate intensity that comes from nearly losing everything. It was healing and claiming, and 5 years of grief transformed into connection. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled like pack and home and future, Alaric traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Marry me again. Properly this time, in front of the whole world. Thessaly pretended to consider, will there be cake? The best cake money can buy. Open bar? Absolutely. And you vow to never, ever believe anyone who says I'm defective again? His arms tightened around her. I vow it on my life, on my throne, on the lives of our 4 perfect sons. Then yes, she kissed him softly. Let's rebuild what we broke, together. The wedding took place under the full moon of the autumn equinox, exactly 1 year after Thessaly had walked back into Alaric's life, carrying the weight of secrets and 4 extraordinary sons. She'd refused a grand spectacle, refused the circus that the first wedding had been with its political maneuvering and false smiles. This ceremony was intimate, sacred, witnessed only by those who mattered. The clearing chosen was ancient, ringed by towering pines that had stood for centuries. Moonlight filtered through branches like silver rain, illuminating a natural altar of smooth stone. Elder Corvus officiated, his voice steady despite his age, reading vows from a text so old the pages crumbled at the edges. Thessaly wore midnight blue silk that flowed like water, her dark hair crowned with moonflowers that glowed faintly in the darkness. No veil, no pretense of virginal innocence. She was a mother, a queen, a woman who had clawed her way back from death and demanded the world bow to her terms. Alaric stood opposite her in traditional ceremonial attire, black leather and silver clasps, the royal crest emblazoned across his chest. But his eyes held none of the cold calculation from their first wedding. Only warmth, only wonder, only the look of a man who knew exactly how close he'd come to losing everything. The boys stood as attendants, wearing miniature versions of their father's outfit. Cassian held the ceremonial dagger that would be used for the blood binding. Theron carried the cup of sacred wine. Evander held a bundle of sage that he'd blessed himself, his violet eyes glowing softly. Lysander bore the rings, 2 bands of white gold inscribed with promises in the old language. Do you, Alaric Shadowthorn, Alpha King of the Obsidian Moon, take this woman as your mate? Elder Corvus's voice carried through the clearing. Not as property, not as vessel, but as equal, as partner, as the other half of your soul? I do. Alaric's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Thessaly's face. I take her as my queen, my mate, my conscience. I vow to honor her choices, to protect her children, to stand beside her and never again presume to stand above her. And do you, Thessaly Ravenshade, Luna and sovereign in your own right, take this man as your mate, knowing his failures, knowing his flaws, choosing him not from necessity, but from will. Thessaly's throat tightened. She looked at Alaric and saw every version of him. The boy who'd courted her with wildflowers and stolen kisses. The king who'd thrown her away like garbage. The father who'd smashed through windows to save his sons. The man who'd spent 8 months proving that change was possible. I do. Her voice rang clear. I take him as my partner, my co-ruler, the father of my children. I vow to give him honesty even when it's harsh. To demand better when he falters. To build with him a kingdom where no woman ever suffers, as I did. The blood binding was swift. A shallow cut across their palms, hands clasped together, their mingled blood falling onto the sacred stone. The pack bonds that had been severed 5 years ago, reformed, but different now. Not the traditional hierarchy of alpha and submissive omega. This was something new. 2 alphas, 2 dominants, choosing to bind themselves as equals. Golden light exploded from their joined hands, racing up their arms, wrapping around their bodies like living thread. The mate bond, fully actualized for the first time, crashed into place with a force that drove them to their knees. Thessaly gasped as Alaric's emotions flooded through the connection. His love, yes, but also his shame, his regret. The 5 years he'd spent haunted by her absence, by dreams of snow and her broken voice begging him to reconsider. She felt his determination to be better, his terror of failing again, his overwhelming gratitude that she'd given him this second chance. Alaric felt her in return. Her strength, forged in fire and survival. Her love for their sons that was fierce enough to move mountains. Her lingering pain, the scars he'd left that would never fully heal. And beneath it all, the fragile, growing trust that maybe this time they could make it work. I've got you, he whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. You better not, she whispered back, because I'm keeping you, Alaric Shadowthorn. All of you. The good and the broken and everything in between. Elder Corvus smiled, moonlight catching in the creases of his ancient face. By the power vested in me by the moon goddess and the old laws, I declare you mated for life. What the goddess has joined, let no wolf tear asunder. The clearing erupted in howls, not just from the small gathering of witnesses, but from wolves throughout the territory who felt the shift in pack bonds. A new Luna had been crowned. A new era had begun. Alaric stood, pulling Thessaly up with him. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they broke apart, he bit down gently on the curve of her neck, right over the pulse point. The mating mark bloomed instantly, a silver crescent that would mark her as his for the rest of her life. Thessaly returned the favor, her canines extending as she bit the same spot on his neck. His blood, rich with alpha power, flooded her mouth. The bond cemented completely, unbreakable now by anything short of death. Mine. Alaric growled against her skin. Ours, she corrected, pulling back to look at their sons. This isn't just about us anymore. The boys rushed forward, and suddenly they were engulfed in a family embrace. 4 small bodies pressed against them, laughter and excited chatter filling the sacred space. Silas watched from the edge of the clearing, his gruff exterior cracking into something that might have been tears. 1 year later, Thessaly stood in the same clearing, one hand pressed against her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, carrying a daughter who kicked with the same alpha strength her brothers possessed. The boys circled her protectively, their powers having grown exponentially in the 2 years since they'd arrived at the Obsidian Moon. Cassian, now 6, could command full-grown wolves with just his voice. Theron could shift partially, manifesting claws and enhanced speed at will. Evander had developed the ability to sense lies, to read emotions so clearly he'd become an invaluable asset in political negotiations. Lysander had memorized every military strategy text in the Royal Library and regularly beat Alaric at tactical games. "Are you sure you should be out here?" Alaric fretted, hovering like an overprotective shadow. The physician said, "Bed rest." The physician can stuff his bed rest. Thessaly laughed, tilting her face toward the sun. "I spent my first pregnancy terrified and alone. I'm spending this one living. Our daughter deserves to feel the forest, to smell the pine, to know she's wanted and celebrated. She is." Alaric's hand joined hers on her belly, his palm large enough to span the curve. "She's the most anticipated princess in Pack history. We've already received gifts from 12 territories, probably trying to secure marriage contracts." Thessaly rolled her eyes. "She's not even born yet. I've burned all of them." Alaric said cheerfully, "Our daughter will choose her own path, just like her mother did." Movement at the edge of the clearing drew their attention. A messenger, breathing hard, holding a tablet. "My king, my queen." He bowed deeply. "There's been a development. Councilman Malachar has been spotted gathering forces in the rogue territories. Intelligence suggests he's building an army." Thessaly and Alaric exchanged a look. Through their bond, she felt his instant shift to warrior mode, his wolf rising to meet the threat. But she also felt his hesitation, his glance toward her pregnant form. "Don't even think about benching me," Thessaly warned. "I can strategize from the war room just fine. You're 7 months pregnant, and I've got 4 alpha sons, a mate bond that makes us twice as strong together, and access to Ravenshade Alchemic's entire arsenal of specialized compounds." She smiled, and it was the expression of a woman who toppled kingdoms and rebuilt them in her image. Malachar picked the wrong family to threaten. Alaric's laugh was dark, promising violence. That he did. He turned to the messenger. "Convene the war council. Pull our allies' representatives, and send word to the border territories. Anyone harboring Malachar's forces will be considered hostile." The messenger fled to carry out orders. Alaric pulled Thessaly close, careful of her belly, breathing in her scent. "We'll end this quickly, before she arrives." "We will." Thessaly agreed, "because our daughter is going to be born into a world that's safe, where rogues don't need to fear persecution, where mothers aren't cast out for lies, where children know their worth isn't determined by their usefulness to a throne." "You've changed everything," Alaric murmured against her hair. "The diarchy, the new laws protecting Omegas, the trade agreements with human corporations. The entire Northern Territory is unrecognizable from what it was 3 years ago. We changed it." Thessaly corrected. Together, 4 years after the wedding, the training grounds of the Obsidian Moon were loud with the sounds of combat. Cassian and Theron sparred in the center ring, their movements too fast for untrained eyes to follow. Evander sat cross-legged at the edge, meditating, his violet aura pulsing with each breath. Lysander stood at a tactical table, moving miniature figures across a map while senior warriors watched and took notes. On the sidelines, a 3-year-old girl with dark hair and violet eyes watched her brothers with intense focus. Princess Celine, named not to honor the woman who tried to destroy them, but to reclaim the word, to transform it from a symbol of betrayal into a symbol of redemption. She was beautiful and terrifying. This little princess who'd been born during a lightning storm that had knocked out power across 3 territories, who'd opened her eyes for the first time and looked at her father with such fierce intelligence, he'd actually stepped back in shock. "Mama." Celine tugged on Thessaly's sleeve. "When can I fight like Cassian?" "When you're older, my love." Thessaly smoothed her daughter's hair, unable to suppress a smile. "You have to walk before you can run." "I can run!" Celine's eyes flashed gold, just for a moment. "Want to see?" "No running." Alaric scooped his daughter up, tossing her in the air until she shrieked with laughter. "You'll give your mother a heart attack." Thessaly watched her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what she'd fought for. Not revenge, though that had been sweet. Not power, though she wielded it now with skill. This moment, this normal, chaotic, beautiful moment of her children laughing and her mate looking at her like she'd hung the moon. A commotion at the gates drew their attention. Guards were escorting someone in, a bedraggled figure in chains. As they got closer, Thessaly recognized the sharp features, now gaunt with months of rough living. Malachar. "We caught him trying to cross into neutral territory," the guard captain reported. His rogue army dissolved when they realized he had no real resources, just empty promises. Alaric studied the man who'd tried to destroy his family, who'd stolen 5 years they could never get back. The easy thing would be execution. The political thing would be a public trial. But he looked at Thessaly, waited for her judgment. She stepped forward, violet eyes assessing. "You took something from me, Malachar. Years I can't reclaim. Trust that took years to rebuild. You hurt people I love." Malachar lifted his chin, trying for defiance even in defeat. "So kill me. Make it quick." "No." Thessaly's smile was cold. "Death is too easy. You're going to live, Malachar. You're going to live as a rogue, powerless, watching from the shadows as the kingdom you tried to destroy becomes the most prosperous in Pack history. You're going to watch our children grow strong and powerful, and every day you're going to remember that you lost." She turned to Alaric. "Exile him to the human territories. No pack will take him. Let him live among those he considered beneath him." Alaric nodded to the guards. "You heard your queen. Strip him of his pack marks and dump him across the border." As Malachar was dragged away, screaming protests, Thessaly felt only emptiness where rage used to live. She'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. Had taken everything meant to break her and forged it into strength. That night, as she tucked Celine into bed between her 4 protective brothers, Thessaly felt Alaric's presence in the doorway. He watched them with an expression of such profound gratitude it made her throat tight. "What?" she asked softly, careful not to wake the children already drifting toward sleep. "Just remembering." Alaric crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. 5 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Thought I'd made a choice I could live with. And now I know the truth." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. The best thing I ever did was fail to destroy you completely, because you came back stronger, came back and built something I could never have achieved alone. We built it, Thessaly corrected, as she always did, together. They stood in the doorway, watching their 5 children sleep. Cassian with one protective arm thrown over Theron. Evander curled around Selene like a guardian. Lysander at the foot of the bed, even in sleep, positioned strategically. The future stretched before them, uncertain but bright. There would be challenges. Selene would grow up and demand to train alongside her brothers. The boys would eventually need to choose their own paths, possibly outside the pack. Politics would continue to be complex. Enemies would rise, but they would face it all together. Not as Alpha and Omega, not as king and subject, but as true partners who'd been tested in fire and emerged tempered into something unbreakable. Thessaly leaned into Alaric's warmth, let herself feel safe in a way she'd thought lost forever. The rejection that had nearly destroyed her had instead become the catalyst for her greatest transformation. She'd been thrown away and had returned as a queen. Sometimes, she thought as sleep began to claim her, the best revenge really is living powerfully ever after. The last image, before darkness took her into dreams, was of her family, whole, safe, hers. And that was worth more than any crown.